Yeah, I'd like to welcome everyone here for this fantastic debate tonight. It's great to see so many people and for the Conservative future to keep growing in this area. Before I hand over to Jack and the debate, to say in the area at the moment is excessively busy with 2 by-elections in the next 2 weeks in Fulham and in South Kensington. So any help that we can get from you is always greatly appreciated. And I think it's a very exciting time as well to hold this debate, because after only a brief hiatus since Asquith's started proposal only 100 years ago, this is the second instalment of the debate, and we're here to finalise the issue once and for all. And with the proposal coming to Parliament this Wednesday, it's a great time to hear from all these speakers. So I'm going to ask Jack Head, who is a member of our committee, the outreach officer, who's done a great job organising this event, to take the hand and introduce our great speakers. So.
Okay, thanks Peter. We're joined today, brilliantly, by Lord James Bethell from the Hereditary Peers Association, by Craig Rimmer on my left, from the think tank Parliament Street, who was the former head of information at the Conservative Research Department, and also by Andrew Taggart from Bow Group, the think tank who's written a paper on the issue. We were supposed to be joined by Baroness Faulkner, but unfortunately she's been whipped in the Lords by Ken Clark. But I'm sure you'll appreciate that. But that's a noble excuse, so we won't treat her too harshly. But brilliant. The idea is that each of our guests will speak for 5 minutes, and then after that we'll ask you some questions. Well, I won't ask you questions. You will ask us questions, and then they'll debate the questions you've asked, and then we'll have a sort of more general open discussion about it. So. To start off, James Bethell.
It shouldn't be me who starts at all, because I'm the one who knows least about this subject. These 2 eminent speakers, one of whom has written a pamphlet on the subject, know a lot more. I'm really here as the stunt speaker, the warm-up act. I am actually a living hereditary peer. And I feel like a sort of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because it's not something that one readily admits to these days. It's certainly not on my website or something that I've got on my CV, because these days the hereditary principle is massively unfashionable, and more than being unfashionable, it's under attack as an ideology in lots of different ways. By way of background, I can tell you that my great-grandfather was a great man. He was an Edwardian, a man of parts. He was a philanthropist who built hospitals, entrepreneur, who was a property developer. And of course, he was treasurer of the Liberal Party. And in 1923, the family says he bought the peerage for about £10,000. And depending on how you calculate it, that's worth about £3.5 million, which is considerably more than one would need to donate to a political party these days. The going rate is roughly £1 million these days. My grandmother used to joke, gave £10,000 when £10,000 was a fortune. There we go. And that kind of person is vilified, I think, when we look back. If he was alive today, he would be regarded as elitist and feudal. We'd frown on him. And I think that that's right. So I delight in the fact that the world massively moved on, that John Bethell, as he was then, is no longer running the world with droit de seigneur. But my heart breaks. I have an emotional bond with the House of Lords, and I cannot disguise from it. My heart breaks when I see reforms being advocated that clearly are political by nature, will ruin the things that are good about the past, and put in place detrimental, politically inspired changes. Something that replaces the strong with the weak, that replaces integrity with politics. But I, like a lot of people, cannot help thinking that the replacement of a largely appointed house with a tiny little bit of salt and pepper from the hereditary principle has got to be a bad idea if it means that there are going to be more politicians. And John Major put it succinctly. He said, if the answer to your question is that there should be more politicians, then you're simply asking the wrong question. Since we've got constitutional experts, I'm not going to run through all of the different arguments for and against reforming the House of Lords. What I'm going to do is to take a different take on it. I'm going to recite for you what has historically been regarded as the benefits of the hereditary principle, and to use that as a little lens through which to study this question of the House of Lords reform. And I must admit, particularly sad that Lady Faulkner is not here for this bit of my speech. She enjoyed it very much indeed. Firstly, and this comes through all of the literature connected with 1999 House of Lords reform debate, the role of the hereditary principle is historic continuity, representation of the landed classes through Winkeneggamot, and the Curia Rages hark back to the 600s. The idea that our representative institutions should be in some way connected with the history of our society is one that's had an appeal to constitutional lawyers from the very beginning. Secondly, organic stability. A reminder that honour and authority don't come from simple wealth and position in society, they come from institutions of our forebears. Thirdly, predictability. Not a fashionable concept in the age of Google and the breaking of the genome, but something that people instinctively find very reassuring. I found in one of the debates someone saying that it is comfortable to wake up in the morning with knowledge that there are 92 hereditary peers in the House of Lords. And then there is the TARDIS point, the representation of the time-space continuum in British life. The idea that our great institutions shouldn't just be ever-changing churning of the professional and political classes, but in some ways they should be rooted in time and space. I mean, Doctor Who is a Time Lord, after all. He is not a stakeholder in the time community. And then, fifthly, there is the Julian Fellows point. For him, the hereditary principle is about the protection of the Queen. Or, he argues, if you get rid of hereditary peers in the House of Lords, the next step is to get rid of the Queen. She won't have a court to defend her, the principle is broken, and she'll be cast out to a small island in the Mediterranean. Now those 5 points, I think, are cute, they're well recited, they're very sweet. I genuinely don't give them any credit at all. They are elitist and feudal by nature, and really a bit of a laugh. But I think that there are 3 other points used in the defence of the hereditary principle, which are interesting, and which do help us understand the debate today. Firstly, leisure. It was said that the hereditary peers had time to consider Acts of Parliament in a way that poor old MPs rushing with their grubby professional jobs and trying to look after the electorate would never possibly have. And do you know what? That is true today as it was then. MPs, as you know, are completely on the rack to their electorate. Post-expenses scandals, they've all made massive obligations to their local constituencies to be glorified social workers and hardly have the time to turn up to the House at all. Significant pieces of legislation that were put through by the new government weren't even debated, even halfway, let alone to their full extent, and it was left to the Lords to put in the scrutiny and improvements that are necessary for good legislation. That point about leisure tells us that an elected peerage that gives people respite from the endless churning of elections is a very important one. In the US Senate, there are 6 yearly cycles, and with almost a guaranteed chance of winning. The Senate has that. The same sense of leisure about the way it goes about scrutiny. Secondly, membership. If you look at the peers themselves in terms of their technical ability, their expertise, you will find medical experts, legal experts, astrophysicists, minds that are bigger than, frankly, you'll ever find in the House of Commons. The skill set is very different, and the components of the people are way above academically those that you find in the House of Commons. And we were laughing amongst ourselves that the most unlikely and counterintuitive advocate, or skeptic, I should say, of House of Lords reform is the venerable Shami Chakrabarty, upon on whom I agree with very, very little. But it's extremely exciting for me to see her standing there saying that for her, comfort could be found in the protection of individual liberty, not in the House of Lords, and not in the House of Commons, which blows like the wind to the fashions of mob rule. The House of Lords, where people can stand back and take an independent view of legislation. There you will find equal treatment under the law fought for. There are mechanisms against corruption and a check on parliamentary ambition. So, by way of conclusion, I'd say, if you really want an elected House of Lords, and these two gentlemen will put forward much more sensible arguments than mine about the cost and the implications to our Constitution and the practicalities of how it works and the implications on our Constitution. If you want that, then you will have to have a new Constitution inscribed like the American Constitution in stone and defended by a Supreme Court of enormous power that can challenge Nick Griffin, overweening civil servants, megalomaniacs from Europe, and all of the other people who challenge our liberties. And for me, that is simply too much bother and a step too far. I would prefer to have ermine-clad elected peers, some bishops and some hereditaries if you must, looking after our freedoms and standing up for our rights.
Well, Bethel has taken the joke I was going to make about admiring House of Lords and going and looking at it, so unfortunately I can't make that joke. But I agree with him that it is an unfair analysis, because I think if you look seriously at the opposition to an elected House, opposition to an appointed House of Lords, it's never about the effectiveness of the House of Lords, it's always about who's in it. It's always about the fact that there's hereditary peers, it's always about the fact that there's bishops, it's always about the fact that there's life peers who are in large part appointed under a very, let's say, mixed system. Now, I'm going to start with one of the main ones, which is that the House of Lords at the moment maintains a very delicate balance between being too pro-government and too anti-government, because of its composition, because of independent peers, and because of everything else. Now, if you think about the possibility of us having an elected House of Lords at the moment, elected in the proportional representation, we would have a government majority in the Lords at the moment, simply because 59% of peers are currently Conservatives or Liberal Democrats. Now, you may very well welcome that, but I don't. Another point is that elected Lords will lead to members having far less time to scrutinise legislation. Studies show that MPs currently spend at least half of their time on casework, constituency casework. A lot of you might think that actually they spend most of their time in the chamber. They don't. They actually spend very little of their time in the chamber, sometimes as little as 10–15% of their time. The House of Lords, if you have an elected, would have the same problem, because you would have constituency casework and you would have campaigning. And you would have all these things taking up time of the Lords away from the chamber, whereas now their main duty is to go into the chamber or to go into a select committee and to make arguments and to help to develop laws and to scrutinise government policy. And if anything, that's one of the biggest benefits of the House of Lords. Quite often, you get, as Lord Bethel said, legislation going from the House of Commons to the House of Lords, either not debated in very much detail or not debated at all. And that isn't particularly useful or constructive. And actually, here's another point. Contrary to the myth that a lot of pro-election groups advocate, the public don't necessarily support an elected House of Lords. If you look deeply, you actually look deeply into any poll that is constructed, that is conducted by a polling company on the issue of House of Lords reform, the simplistic headline will say, public support an elected House of Lords. To an extent, yes, they do. But if you look closely, it also shows that they support facets of an appointed Lords, like having independent peers. It shows that they're confused about what the House of Lords does, and it shows that when you actually ask people their opinion either way, and they've had both sides of the argument, it shows that they're in favour of an appointed Lords, not elected. So that's one of the things that's actually put up a lot as a big reason for going towards election, and it's not true at all. Another point, which Lord Bethel's again referred to, is that the House of Lords at the moment is a chamber of considerable expertise. You have people in there who are scientists, lawyers, former servicemen, judges, health professionals, teachers, all sorts of people in there who you would not get in an elected system because, frankly, they would not stand for election. I don't think many of us can really imagine the academics and professors who are in there now standing for election and winning, even if they did stand. It would be more likely to be people like John Prescott. And I'm not sure all that many of us particularly want John Prescott in the House of Lords if we can avoid it any longer than we have to. I know he's there now. I know he's there now. But the problem is, I know he's there. The problem is he would replace someone else. Instead of having a great professor of law or something, you would have John Prescott. And I'm not sure that's a particular change I want to make. Independent voices, choosing who the peers should be, experts, people in campaigning and all sorts of other areas who know their stuff, not just Prime Minister's buddies. We need more, we need term limits on peers, so they're not in the House of Lords for too long. We need things like a cap on the size of the House of Lords. So I think it's absurd that it should be currently larger than the House of Commons, which it is. It's got 150 or so members more than the Commons does. We need things like better discipline for peers, so that peers who don't actually bother to show up should show up and speak or get kicked out. Michael Heseltine, Lord Heseltine, was appointed as a member of the House of Lords in 2001. Does anyone want to guess when he last spoke, when he first spoke? This year, March 2012. 11 years since he became a member of the House of Lords. Now, I'm sorry, that is absurd. Whatever you think of Michael Heseltine, one way or another. That's exactly the sort of thing that we should be scrapping. If they're going to be in it, they should be contributing. They should be going to debates, they should be going to select committees, they should be helping make policy. And finally, to address Lord Bethel's point directly, we need a single way of getting into the House of Lords. No hereditary peers, although I'm sure, I don't know whether or not he'll agree with that, and no bishops. Because I think, unfortunately, he may disagree with me, but I don't think there's any more, or if all that there ever has been, a credible defence which directly addresses the basic issue at stake with hereditary peers or new bishops. That reserving seats in our parliament for people based on accident of birth rather than appointments on merits is unacceptable. But with bishops, it's a similar argument. It's not accident of birth, but it's accident of the position they've inherited as being a bishop of the Church of England. I don't think that's fair either. What we need is to have people to be appointed on their merit. And in the case of bishops, it shouldn't just be Church of England bishops. It should be these from Jewish community, from the Muslim community, from people from different denominations of Christianity, for example. For hereditary peers, you should have hereditary peers in the House of Lords, by all means, but only the ones who really work hard, only the ones who really contributed frequently, only the ones who've really shown that they can make a difference to the debate. I just want to finish with two very brief final thoughts. Firstly, we're, as far as I'm aware, all members of the Conservative Party, or at least supporters of it. And I actually think it's unfortunate that we have to be having this debate in the first place, because to me, conservatism in a very, very simple way can be summed up by the idea of if it's not broke, don't fix it. And as far as I'm concerned, apart from some minor things here and there which can be done to make the House of Lords that bit better, the House of Lords is not broken. Fine, it's not elected, that doesn't mean it's broken. It works well. Most people agree it works well. And I find it slightly worrying that we have a Conservative Prime Minister who is so keen, well, he's not particularly keen because of Nick Clegg, but he's still pushing it through. And I don't think that's right at all. And secondly and finally, to those who might favour an elected House of Lords, if it wasn't for the undemocratic, anachronistic House of Lords under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, we would have had the following things. Restriction of the right to trial by jury. You would have had to have a new passport to leave the country. You would not have been allowed to have a new passport to leave the country without signing up for electronic surveillance by the state through compulsory ID cards. Churches would have had to ask regulators for permission to ring their bells. It would have been a crime for a comedian to make a joke about religion. Every citizen, not just terrorists, would have been laid open to long-term detention without trial. Secret casinos would have sprung up all across Britain. You would have had all sorts of things that the supposedly imperfect House of Lords has blocked and stopped them from doing. And I think that list alone, just those few examples, shows us why we need the House of Lords and why we will continue to need it. Thank you.
Now, as Conservatives, we have a problem. In 1997, when Blair came in, he actually destroyed our constitution. What we had before was an accident of history in terms of the House of Lords and hereditary peers and some appointed peers, but it worked. I don't deny that. Now we have a system that doesn't work effectively and has no justification. And it doesn't wear well with the British people to be talking about this and defending a democratic deficit. On one hand, we're attacking the European Union. We're looking for constructive changes to the European Union to ensure that's more democratically accountable. But on the other hand, we're going to try and defend the current status quo in the House of Lords. I just don't think that that's acceptable, personally.
It has to look at the last election in terms of the midterms and the sort of results that were brought out in terms of the council elections, the sort of results that will be brought about in the European elections in 2014 to see that we will get checks and balances if we just put it onto a different electoral cycle. If we look to the United States and the situation in the United States in regards to presidential elections and midterm elections, you will often see the American citizenry deciding if they've ended up with a Democratic president and they've got 2 Democratic houses, but they want to adjust that 2 years later. And I think the UK citizenry will be equally sophisticated when it comes to voting in that respect. I don't believe our current politicians are a corrupt lot. And you guys here, you know that too. I mean, you've had face-to-face experience with MPs. I'm in dangerous territory here, aren't I? You've had face-to-face experience with MPs, and you know, largely on the whole, they are actually very public service orientated. And essentially, a lot of them are becoming more independently minded, if anything else, in terms of the party structure. Never before have I seen a Conservative government that's only sort of 2 years in and already navel-gazing amongst the backbench MPs about the direction that it should actually be taking. This old sort of party structure, which, you know, in terms of the whips that was existing and did so well in the 80s and 90s, has sort of been broken apart by various rebellions under Blair and in the coalition government. So I don't hold that to be true in terms of the House of Commons, and I think with the Lords, I think it will be less true. In terms of appointments, I'm just going to go back to this idea of it ain't broke, don't fix it. It just doesn't wash with me because it wasn't broken before. They broke it, and we've got to fix it somehow. And the question I have to ask you all, as a house, is really, you know, are you willing to just accept this mishmash of Blairism that's really mucks up our constitution? Or do you want to just say, let's be the bigger party here, let's argue for democracy, what they're arguing for in Syria, what they're arguing, low, I know, what we've been arguing for in Brussels. Let's argue for democracy here in terms of our second chamber. Thank you very much.